I've always been jealous of people who wear their hearts on their sleeves. I've never been able to react in a normal way. If I'm suddenly frightened, I won't jump or scream. I still feel fear, but it looks like I don't. I've only heavily sobbed 2 times I can remember, and I've never had a bout of laughter that I couldn't stop. This strange mild manner didn't affect how my family cared for me. However, I found most people were put off by my demeanor. This caused me to turn away from customer-facing jobs. After drifting from one failed career to the next, I settled on a simple one. I would retrieve bodies, and on the side started to study to become a coroner. Believe it or not, where I live, you don't need to have any kind of medical training to cut open dead bodies. However, I still was determined to take classes to fulfill my role. There is a desperate lack of coroners. If I wanted, I could become one and learn on the job. I found myself blessed with a lack of a gag reflex. I drove with a partner who often needed a few minutes to compose himself on the more gruesome pickups. The last body we retrieved together upset him to the point he could barely look at it as we loaded it into the back. It was the body of a younger man riddled with quarter-sized holes. I learned that night people had a phobia of small holes bunched together. I didn't blame people for disliking such a thing. The sight of the body made the back of my neck itchy, but I could handle it. I said I would take in the body so my coworker could head home early. He took me up on my offer. There is a difference between a medical examiner and a mortician. We still worked out of a funeral home simply because it was easier to split the costs of the expensive equipment between the 2 businesses. After the stretcher was out of the van, my partner left for the night. I easily wheeled the body to the elevator to head to the basement. The place was creepy after dark. There was never enough light downstairs. No matter how hard we tried, mold kept building up near the corners of the walls. I struggled to get the stretcher out of the elevator because one of the wheels got stuck. I made one last push, the motion almost causing the body to slip off. I silently apologized to the corpse, then pushed the bag back into place. I could have sworn I felt something move inside the bag. I rubbed my hands against my pants, knowing my mind was just playing tricks on me. I pushed open one of the double doors to get into the autopsy area. A lock on the doors broke a few weeks ago, making it so only one door opened. At one point, you could lock both doors from the inside of the room, but if you jiggled the handle enough, you could unlock the only working door. We hadn't gotten any oversized bodies come through, so we didn't bother spending the money to fix it. My boss already finished the previous body we brought in earlier that day. He was just signing the report when I wheeled the newcomer into the middle of the room. "Just you tonight, Rory?" my boss asked as he turned around. "I can get our client downstairs on my own. It's not a big deal, Mr. Flynn," I replied, not pausing in my task transferring the body to the steel table. "Victor," he corrected. He has been trying to get me to call him by his first name since I started working there. Because he was older than me, it felt a bit disrespectful. I nodded, trying to break my habit. He came over and helped remove the bag. We silently worked together, getting the room prepped for our task. After looking over the body in a better light, I couldn't help but wonder what happened to him. He was found in the middle of the woods, with no ID and rags for clothing. Aside from the holes, there were no other signs of death. Each hole appeared to be so clean I considered a human made the wounds with some sort of tool. But for what purpose? Figuring out the motive behind a crime wasn't our job. We just needed to figure out the cause of death. "Can I stay and watch on this one?" I asked as we were finishing organizing the side table of tools. "I think you're ready to make some cuts this time. You have a steady hand and have respect for the dead. It will be nice when you're able to assist with some of the troublesome paperwork," Victor said with a very small smile. I respected him a great deal. I wondered if you're drawn to the shadows and want more tales that chill the spine, don't forget to subscribe and join us. You wouldn't want to miss what lurks in the next story. was because we were similar. His voice was soft, and he was never troubled by any kind of gruesome sight that came with the job. I've never seen him rattled, and yet he could still smile. We also had matching pale skin, black hair, and dark eyes. I bet some people assumed we were related. I'm awful at paperwork. I think they might be all on you, I replied with a shrug, which was the truth. I really hated doing reports. Darn it. At least I have an employee willing to sacrifice their Friday night for work. I didn't realize it was a Friday. No wonder my coworker wanted to get out of there so fast. I glanced over to watch my boss so carefully arrange the scalpels and tweezers in their proper places. It was like he'd done the same actions 1,000 times before. Even after working here for a while, I didn't know that much about him. If we don't have any clients come in, do you want to do something next Friday? I asked, fully aware of how unprofessional the request sounded. A confused expression came over his face. It was as if no one had ever asked him such a question before. You're aware I'm old enough to be your father, right? He said, a smile creeping back onto his face. I didn't mean it like that, like just to hang out, to get to know each other. I wanted to sound offended by my voice stayed in the same monotone it always had been. We can get to know each other here. However, most people find it difficult to bond as they remove organs. I think we can make it work. But I don't know why you would be interested though, Victor said. At least he wasn't going to fire me or report me to HR. Did we even have an HR? I think you need a friend. I gave an honest answer. People may think we were alike. But after working here, I knew Victor was different in some ways others may not notice. I couldn't emote the way I wanted. He kept his emotions hidden behind a calm and collected mask. I couldn't shake the feeling he didn't show just how lonely he felt to anyone. I often found myself watching him for an extra second or two through the basement door windows. His expression was much different when he thought he was alone. I've seen his hand go to take off a ring that wasn't there before washing his hands out of habit, along with so many other hints that he didn't have anyone in his life. I wasn't expecting him to accept my offer of friendship so we could keep things professional, but I wanted him to know the offer would always be there. A sound made us turn around. When you work in a morgue, you don't expect to hear anything aside from the hum of the fridge. What we saw didn't register for a few seconds. I saw a stressed smile come over my boss's face. He was fully convinced this was a prank. The body I'd brought in sat up. The head slowly turned in our direction, the blank eyes landing on two shocked workers. My boss looked at me expecting I would fess up to a joke. For once, my expressions showed just enough horror to convince me I wasn't behind all of this. I didn't blame him for not thinking this was real. Bodies don't just sit up. Half-rotten ones with countless holes don't move. But whatever made a home inside that flesh does. The corpse reached an arm out, and squirming shapes came to the surface of random holes. I felt stomach acid hit the back of my throat, making me think I would throw up for the first time in my life for a reason beyond an illness. The small creatures that made their home inside the body crawled out just enough for us to see the worm-like body and a mouth filled with countless teeth. We both reacted far too late. My hand fell on a scalpel. I gripped it tight, but my mind was slow to react. The corpse suddenly launched itself off the table and onto the person next to me. I pried the monster off him far too late. Within those few seconds, it had ripped open my boss's collar to get to the skin underneath. The bite wasn't as bad as I feared, but I saw one of those worms trying to get into the wound. Victor sputtered in shock and raised a hand to his bleeding neck. I stabbed the scalpel deep into the corpse's temple. I tossed the body aside to go over to remove the worm trying to dig into warm flesh. I had just finished stomping the thing into the cold tile floor when the corpse came at us again. So it didn't follow zombie movie rules, which sucked. We were too cheap to buy rib shears and used garden shears instead. The weight of them was nice in my hands. I kept the attacking monster back long enough for Victor to stumble towards the door. I got the walking corpse behind the stretcher I used to wheel it in. I then pushed the stretcher against the wall, pinning the body for a few seconds. I then ran, grabbing hold of Victor's arm to try and drag him out of there. We didn't make it. I heard a god-awful cracking sound. By the time I looked, the head of the corpse had split open. A long, disgusting tube came from the neck. So many teeth shone in the dim light. I felt my body get pushed to the side when that long worm snapped outwards, lighting fast to clamp down on Victor's throat. His mouth fell open in a silent scream and his legs gave out from under him. I don't know if the creature was weakened or if we were just lucky. I pulled off the tube, mentally wincing at the large wound that was left behind. I saw more of those smaller worms wiggling around and infecting a new host. I got him to his feet, and we made it to the door before the tube attacked again. I was forced through the door, and suddenly it was closed behind me. I saw Victor's pale face through the window, a pained smile on his face. "Victor!" I shouted at him as I pushed against the door with everything I had. He knew he was infected and didn't want to risk whatever we were facing to get out. He wanted me to get out safe, and barricading himself with the monster inside the room was the only way. The hell with that. He collapsed on the other side of the door as I got to work jiggling the handle to unlock it. I needed to act fast. The worm noticed my face behind the window. When I felt the door unlock, I held my breath and waited. The gruesome worm shot out again, crashing through the window. I ducked just in time and then charged into the room. First, I got down low to find a lighter in Victor's pockets. I knew he smoked but was trying to quit. I found the small object and then raced over to the desk on the other side of the room. The people working here got used to the smells of the job, but we often got cops or detectives who weren't. As a small mercy, we would spray some Lysol if we knew they were coming. I grabbed a can I knew was full. Then I faced the creature that was recovering from the failed attack. Normally, I was against people doing what I did. If you held the flame too close to the nozzle, the flames could go back inside the can and explode. Knowing that, I kept the lighter far enough away to be a bit safer and created the outcome I wanted. Before the worm could shoot out again, I sprayed the main body with as many flames as I could. I heard wailing from the other infected creatures inside the body. The attack didn't last as long as I liked. The monster got out from behind the stretcher to stumble around screaming in pain. We also worked with a lot of flammable chemicals. I won't say what I poured on the screaming corpse as it was distracted, but it worked. With one more lighter flick, the thing burst into flames. I coughed as I dragged Victor out of the room. I blocked the door, keeping the now dying monster inside to burn. He didn't look good. He lost a lot of blood, and I got right to work pulling out any worms I saw. The skin around his puncture wounds wriggled with the infection. I didn't know what to do. I would cause more damage by ripping those worms out. I risked nicking an artery because of where they were crawling around. Through the stress of the moment, I saw a thin chain around his neck with a worn wedding ring. For some reason, that sight was what made me refuse to lose him. I got as many worms as I could. Then I realized he'd stopped breathing. I needed to deal with that first. Thank God I recently redid my CPR course. I know most people wouldn't dare give mouth-to-mouth to someone he had just been infected with who knows what, but I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted him to live. CPR is hard on the body. I didn't know if it had been a minute or an hour. Sweat already stung my eyes as I silently begged him to breathe again. I went from begging to telling him to come back. I couldn't explain why I became so sure Victor would open his eyes again. It was like I told the universe that it wasn't his time and it listened. I was scared as hell when the infected corpse sat up, and yet I wasn't scared for Victor. A sharp, hot pain came from my hands in the middle of compressions. It was as if an electrical current came from my chest to travel into his. After the feeling disappeared, Victor started to cough. His body jerked as his back arched. I grabbed a hold of his head and laced my fingers behind it to cushion his skull from slamming into the hard ground. I didn't force him to stay still, unsure if that would harm him more. I just didn't want him to smash his head open as he thrashed around. The bloody wound on his neck wriggled and, to my shock, slowly started to heal. When he finally fell still, the wound scarred over, and his breathing returned to normal. I sat, covered in blood with a horrible burnt smell overtaking the entire basement. I wasn't even aware a pair of men in suits came out of the elevator, one with a sword in hand. The other held a gun pointed downwards. I met their stares, feeling as shocked as they looked. The next few moments were a blur. One checked on the charred pile in the other room. He then borrowed the stretcher to place Victor on. I was separated from him to be led into a car waiting outside. I don't know how long we drove for. No one told me much. They just provided some water and rags to get cleaned up a little. The car stopped in front of a medical building I didn't recognize. I was brought into a clean white room and then told to hand over my clothing to be destroyed. I didn't put up a fight. At least I was given some privacy to shower and change into a clean set of white clothing. Then I was left alone for hours. The room had a bathroom, a hard bed, and a stack of paperback books. Nothing else. I sat alone trying to understand what happened. I had a million questions, but when another man dressed in a suit came into the room, I only asked one. Is Victor all right? I hated how calm I sounded. For once, I wanted to act as distressed as I felt. So far, he'll be under observation, the man explained. He took out my wallet and phone that had been in my pockets when I gave up my clothing. At least I got those back. Is everything all right? I mean, are there more infected corpses out there? I pressed, slightly worried this was the start of the end of the world. He thankfully shook his head. This was a mistake. It never should have happened, let alone you to be the one to pick up the body. Normally a company that deals with things of this nature are the ones on scene. I hate to say it, but this slipped through the cracks. As awful as it is, when accidents in this manner do happen, they get cleaned up quickly afterward. His suit looked perfect along with his styled black hair. He looked like the ideal image of a secret agent. He hinted at the fact this sort of thing happened often enough for an entire company with agents to deal with it to exist. At that moment, I didn't care about the fact monsters were real. So, 2 people nearly dying counts as a quick cleanup? Is Victor just a mistake? Again, I hated just how calm my voice sounded. On the inside, my chest was hot from rage. The man's face dropped. He lost his tough agent mask and I felt bad snapping at him. If it was up to him, there would be no mistakes. For some reason, they couldn't fully avoid others getting hurt. You're right to be upset. We should have caught onto this before it reached you. We'll be providing Mr. Flynn as much care as needed. I thanked him for that news, but I didn't apologize for my words. Since I was cleared to go, he led me outside to a waiting car. There were no threats to not tell others what happened, nor did he say what company he worked for. I got home that night with so many questions but was too exhausted to think about them. I didn't go to work for 2 days. The cover-up story was there had been a gas leak. On the second day, an unknown number called. I answered it hoping it was news about how my boss was doing. When they said he was doing well, I pressed to be able to go and see him. After a bit of back and forth, they agreed to send another car. The other medical building was 2 hours away. I didn't mind. I needed to sign in, and somehow it didn't feel like a top-secret government building. The same agent as the other night met me at the door. He filled me in a little as we made our way down to Victor's room. Seeing him may be hard on you. He won't be the same as before. Normally, the infection takes over the body so it can multiply inside. For some reason, the worms fused with his body, creating, well, something we've never seen before. His brain was affected. He doesn't seem to remember much. The doctors thought it would be good to have a familiar face with him. However, the agent stopped speaking. We stood outside the room, and yet he didn't open the door just yet. My stomach turned, waiting for the rest of the conversation. We cannot guarantee your safety. He may lash out searching for food, he warned. I nodded my head. I was a bit scared of what I was going to see inside that room. I refused to let myself give in to that fear. When the agent knew I was fully aware of the risk, he opened the door to let me inside. Victor looked awful. His face was pale with bags under his eyes. His black hair was limp and unbrushed. He had a small tray on his bed with some small squares of colored paper. A few crumpled balls on the floor showed how he failed to fold the paper into whatever he wanted to make. I slowly walked over, pausing a few steps away. "Do you know who I am?" I asked softly. He raised his head, eyes blank with zero recognition on his face. The oversized white sweater made him seem even paler, his new scars on full display. When I took a step closer, a deep growl came from him. I moved slightly closer, and he pulled back his lips to show off a mouth full of sharp teeth. I noticed the agent in the open doorway, still and yet ready to act. I sat on the chair beside his bed, ignoring the threatening display. "I don't know how to fold a crane either. Let's learn how together. I think you need a friend," I said as I reached over to the paper with the folding instructions. I expected him to snap at my hand being so close. The growling died down and a human expression came back to his face. He watched as I picked up a colored paper to get started with. The one in his hand was wrinkled. "Let's use a fresh piece. What color do you want?" I asked as I took the pile to flip through the colors. "Red?" His voice was low and hoarse, but at least he was talking. I stayed with him for over an hour learning how to fold. I think it was good for him. By the time I was told to leave, we had 2 badly finished cranes on his bedside table. I promised I would be back whenever I was able. Felt wrong to leave him behind. He shouldn't be in this state. None of this should have happened. I couldn't sit still. I knew the gas leak story was a lie. After getting home from seeing Victor I, headed over to the funeral home. I don't know what I was looking for. The back door was locked, but I knew the code. The smell of burnt flesh still hung in the air. It got stronger as the elevator descended to the basement. I stepped into the room, seeing they hadn't cleaned up the bloodstains on the floor. The body had been removed, that was all. Everything was a mess from the struggle. I was told someone would be by to clean because the company already collected everything they needed. But they didn't know when they could send the cleaning service. I gathered up what I needed to get to work. I don't know why I felt I needed to be the one to scrub the blood off the floor. Since the funeral home was closed, I never expected someone to come down into the basement. I didn't even hear them. When a person cleared their throat behind me, my body tensed up. My hand squeezed the sponge so hard it hurt. I half expected to see another dead body up and walking around. That would have been more believable compared to who I saw. A very short man looked down at me. I didn't recognize him and thought it was strange he was wearing pieces of a costume. When he took a step to better see what I was doing, I realized his tall rabbit ears and feet were real. "I am Lupa, the office supervisor for the corporation. I wanted to meet with you personally to apologize for what happened. But you were not at home," he said. His deep voice did not match his appearance. He wore a professional brown vest over a button-up shirt. His dress pants stopped at the knees to let his rabbit legs move freely. He even had a tail that I very much wanted to touch. I didn't let my expression show my intentions. "I think Victor is the one you should apologize to," I replied, standing up to address him. "Yes, you're correct. Tragic that he was harmed. Unfortunately, we do not have enough manpower at our disposal to ensure such a thing never happens again. You can imagine how hard it is to come by people who not only know about supernatural threats but can deal with them. We're lacking in manpower in each department, as you can see. Not even enough cleaners to go around," he said while giving a dirty look to the soapy bloody water on the floor. I didn't like his tone. He spoke as if implying he wanted to say something else. Like, crime scene cleaners? But for, supernatural crime scenes? There are people for that. I asked. "Some. Not enough," he shrugged. "A shame because we do pay so well." I knew he didn't come here to apologize. I didn't know why he didn't just come out and say his reasoning for dropping by. But how did he know I was here to clean up the place? Did he want to offer me any kind of job but didn't care what I did? Were they desperate for people they were willing to let me do any kind of job for them? "So, you're saying there are a few job openings. I'm currently out of work right now. My boss is in the hospital. Do I need to submit a resume?" Lupa smiled at my words. For a cute rabbit man, he really creeped me out. There was something dark hidden behind his expression. "No need for such a thing. We already know everything about you. I'll send over the information for you to approve of. I warn you, this job can have some dangers. Of course, we compensate well because of that. Any job that deals with cleaning up blood or other body fluids is a hazard. Not to mention the mental toll of seeing the outcome of what happens to a body in these scenes. Instead of dealing with just normal murders or bodies rotting alone, I would see the aftermath of a supernatural attack. This wasn't a job for any sane or rational person. All right, I'll finish up cleaning this and then I can look over the job information." I nodded. Another somewhat sinister smile came from Lupa. He thanked me and then headed on his way. I really shouldn't be sticking my nose into danger. I got lucky getting out alive after an encounter with one monster. But I was only cleaning up messes. How dangerous could it be? A job is a job, no matter how frightening or life-threatening it may be. At least I somewhere knew what I was getting into. As I cleaned for hours that night, I wasn't aware of what nightmares waited for me from accepting this job offer.